Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 529 for April 11th, 2023. I am Brendan Cassidy.
And I'm Jay Ledbetter.
Thanks for joining us this weekend, everyone. Well, really, this week. We're recording this midweek. We're so used to doing this on weekends, but we, myself and Jay here, got a bit of a late start with this episode as originally planned. Very busy week for many of us. I mean, most of us just got done celebrating the Easter weekend. So for those of you listening who partook in those celebrations as well, hopefully you had a fun and safe time with your family and friends. Jay, I know that you had to deal with a sick baby on your end. Hopefully Jet is feeling better now, though.
Well, it's been a whole few days of escapades here. We went out of town for the Easter weekend, and then of course I left my work computer and work bag at the house where I was staying in Birmingham. So we had to turn around after about 45 minutes of driving. So that brought us in late to do our episode when we normally would record. So I was like, I gotta push.
I was wondering the tardiness that caused that. I
haven't even started prepping for this podcast. So we lost an hour and a half there. So.
Well, I sympathize with the whole commitment to your job thing, though, your work laptop being a part of that. I just started my new job literally the day as we're recording this, so I know how that feels. My mind is sort of in a different zone right now because I just went through the whole meet and greet onboarding scenario, at least the portion of it that I could do in one day. And on top of that, the office is in University City right by UPenn, so it was a bit of a commute to get there. I feel like I've been awake for like 17 hours, yet that hasn't been the case. It's just a new schedule for me.
No, those first few days at a new gig are an absolute blur. And then you look back on them later and you're like, didn't really learn a whole lot those first few days, but I sure did meet a lot of people. So,
which I guess it's expected, and I kind of like that, because
there's value there.
There's no pressure in many ways, and I don't mean that as a knock on the gig, because the job is certainly important and I'm looking forward to it, but there isn't any pressure because you're not dedicated to anything just yet. You're not reliant on anything just yet until you actually get to that point. But yeah, it was a fun day for sure in that regard, and I'm glad to hear that Jet is feeling at least a little bit better.
Certainly a little bit better. It was a real dad boot camp here the last few days, but we're getting there. We're getting there, and the worst of all was I had to watch him while I was working, which my work was very understanding about. I had to step away every now and then, but
that's good.
But it was a balancing act because this is not a not busy week at work, and then you got a very sick baby that you have to deal with. It's a challenge. I gotta say, it's tough.
And speaking of challenges, I think about those in the Hollywood system, actors specifically, who decide to become directors and how that change of pace. It's insane. But that is the theme for this episode here. Obviously, this is inspired by the film Air, directed by Ben Affleck, the new film from Ben Affleck, who we mostly know as an actor turned screenwriter, now turned director, actor, screenwriter, all of the above when you think about it. But yes, the movie Air, directed by Ben Affleck. Not only do we have a full review of that film available on InSession Film, as well as our YouTube channel, it's between myself and Ryan McQuaid. We are using that as inspiration to talk about our favorite actors turned directors on this episode. Won't be a top 5 or even top 3 list. We talked about maybe doing that, Jay, but for a nice change of pace, let's just have this be a bit more of an informal conversation.
Yeah, we're just going to hang out.
We're just going to hang out. I think we both need it after the stories that we just shared there in our opening there. But yes, actors turned directors will be the theme for this episode. And it's a list that we apparently have done in the InSession Film Podcast way before. I think it was on episode 51, if I'm not mistaken, which was way before both of our times at InSession Film. I forget what movie inspired that, but if you want to hear some archives, go to episode 51 or go on our website and find episode 51 to see what those lists there were. But that will be the theme for this episode. We'll also do a little bit of Q&A that we got from some of our listeners and round out this episode with our poll where we asked all of you who won our movie stars draft. Now, for those of you listening, if you're not sure what we're talking about, on episode 528 just last weekend, myself, Jay, and Ryan McQuaid did our movie stars draft. We did a draft picking our top 5 favorite movie stars. Well, sort of favorite, just a list of who we thought were the best movie stars of all time. And then we asked our listeners to vote. We've got the results. It was a tight race. It's going to be exciting to see these results. But let's go ahead and transition into actors turned directors. We've been seeing this a lot more often now, Jay. I feel like with regard to many comedians out there now, some of whom only have maybe one film tied to their name, but we see a lot of actors taking a chance at directing movies. And in many cases, they've been very successful and have led to movies that have a very distinct voice that most other filmmakers don't necessarily convey, for better and for worse. But in some cases, a very unique and differently stylized voice, I guess we'll say. So with that regard, when you look at some of your favorite actors turned directors, I guess, was there any, maybe not necessarily criteria, but were there any traits or any characteristics that you looked at most as you were trying to narrow this list down for some of your favorites?
No, I didn't really look at this as a conversation about favorites or that ranking that you were talking about. I just kind of looked at it broadly and said, from one generation to the next, that the types of actors that end up being directors has changed drastically. I looked into some of the least successful actors turned directors. Maybe some of these directors only directed one film. And it's a fascinating list of people who have taken on this challenge. And sure. I'll tell you this is very odd that the first time when this was first mentioned that we were doing this as the topic for the episode, the first movie I thought of was a movie I haven't even seen before. I haven't seen it. Okay. But I was like, remember that movie Georgetown that Christoph Waltz directed a few years ago?
Gosh. I never saw it either, but I do remember that now.
I don't know why, but I just always found that fascinating that Christoph Waltz directed this movie with Annette Bening in it and Corey Hawkins. It all sounds really good on paper. Apparently, it's not good. It hardly found distribution at all. Could not get any traction on the festival circuit. And for some reason, that just stuck in my mind as sort of, okay, where can I go from here? If that's the first one I think of, where can we go? Like, what is so...
There are a lot of places you can go outside of Christoph Waltz for that movie.
Well, yes, certainly. But it did just kind of put me in this place of, okay, what does it take for an actor to become a director? Is it exclusively a desire to do so, a level of stardom that you have to reach? How easy is it for a huge movie star to get a movie directed that doesn't have them in it to get the money, right? You see Denzel, for example, he's only directed movies until that movie last year that nobody saw. What was the name of the Michael B. Jordan movie? A Journal for Jordan?
A Journal for Jordan, yeah.
Which nobody saw. That was his first movie he's directed that didn't star him in it. And, it went nowhere. And he's a really interesting example too, but kind of my big thematic ideas that I put together as I was thinking about this was that today's actors turned directors, like the people of the last decade or so, it's not massive stars who become directors.
That's true.
It's very interesting.
They're massive for us because we're cinephiles, so we love a lot of them already. But to your point, from a box office standpoint or from a general audience standpoint, not necessarily the biggest household name.
You look at kind of the previous generation, your Denzels, your Clooney's, right? Your Tom Hanks directed a couple movies just because he was like, oh, I'd like to direct a couple movies.
That's true.
And now it's Greta Gerwig, Jordan Peele, Elizabeth Banks, Olivia Wilde, John Krasinski. Yeah. It's these not totally household names who have become the next generation of successful actor directors. So
Yeah.
that was just kind of an interesting trend I noticed, but there's a million different directions we can go off this.
Absolutely. And you make a great point, or at least you make a great observation of any differences we notice between actors turned directors and which ones don't even choose to star in their own movies. And when they don't star in their own movies, does that lead to further success or further failure? I guess in the case of Denzel Washington, I don't know if I would go as far as to call it failure because I haven't seen that film, A Journal for Jordan, but apparently from a box office and audience response standpoint, it wasn't a hit, I guess, from what I understand. But if they choose to take a literal back seat behind the camera and make a different kind of artistic endeavor possible, what does that lead to? And then there's also the question, can we even really consider those who have only directed one movie? Because we don't really know what their career will look like further on. I mean, we look at, people like Bradley Cooper, for instance, who has a film coming out this year, as far as I understand at this point, Maestro, where he's playing Leonard Bernstein. But up until that point, or up until when that comes out, he only has A Star Is Born, which was a mega hit, and it is a very good movie. But then you look at someone like, okay, you mentioned Olivia Wilde, who has 2 movies to her name. Now, if we did this list when Booksmart first came out, I think many people would be saying, oh, we got to watch out for her. We have to watch out for that name.
Not this guy. I saw the writing on the wall.
You were not a Booksmart fan from the get-go. I liked the film. I thought it was pretty good. But I don't think those same people who really went for Booksmart were going to be saying the same thing after they saw Don't Worry, Darling. So all of a sudden the conversation kind of shifts when they don't have a 2-way winning streak. So I do wonder if people like Bradley Cooper, or I think about this further, maybe Maggie Gyllenhaal, for instance, for The Lost Daughter.
Yeah, she's one that I had on here too.
Yeah, I think of also very recently, you mentioned A Journal for Jordan, which starred Michael B. Jordan, Creed 3. So
Yeah.
Michael B. Jordan as a director there as well. Regina King, who had a really great film with One Night in Miami some time ago. I'm very curious to see what these directors have up their sleeves for a second feature, and I hope it's good. I'll just simply say that, but it does make me wonder, can we separate those from, let's say the, I guess for lack of a better comparison, the Ben Afflecks of the world now, who have 5 directed films to his name, and 4 of them have been pretty big critical hits, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. Affleck is such an interesting one because he became a director after he had, I don't know if you want to say that he had become a failed movie star, but he was in a bad place for a while as an actor. He had the stench of Gigli following him around wherever he went.
Oh God.
And he was more tabloid fodder than silver screen star.
Yeah.
And then he started directing movies, and you were like, oh, he's supremely talented.
Yeah.
He's not one of my favorite directors or anything, but he really has an eye for film. And you listen to interviews with him. He's been doing a lot of interviews with Damon recently because of Air. And those guys they love movies. Oh,
they do.
Man, they love movies. And I love that about them. And they speak so eloquently, and despite the fact that they do have kind of this persona of Boston bros or whatever, they're very thoughtful with the way they talk about their art form.
There's a sophistication. There's something weirdly sophisticated about their, I don't want to use the word machismo, but their brotherly dynamic, which you might not perceive as, I guess, delicate and sophisticated in that way. And I feel like with Ben Affleck, he's sort of in the opposite camp as someone like Denzel Washington, which you brought up earlier, in that, Denzel mostly puts himself in his own movies up until his most recent feature, whereas Ben Affleck was kind of the opposite. I mean, his first movie didn't even feature him, and then everything else kind of did.
That's right. He was in Argo. He was in The Way Back. He was in.
Well, he didn't direct The Way Back, but he was in it.
Oh, that's right. No, you're right. You're right.
But there was The Town. There was.
He wasn't in The Town.
Yeah, he was in The Town.
Oh no, sorry, not The Town. I was thinking of Gone Baby Gone.
You're thinking of, he was not in Gone Baby Gone, which starred his brother. But there was also Live by Night, which is arguably his worst feature. I think many people would agree with that. But he kind of went on this opposite trend of pulling himself
barely
back.
In Air.
What's it? Barely in? I mean,
like not in it that much.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's a strange movie. I think that we can have a further dissection on that one. There'd be a lot to talk about. I think that movie was kind of butchered by other things outside of Ben Affleck's ability as an actor and director. Let's throw out a few other names that we had on our list as far as some of our most notable ones that we thought of with regard to actors turned directors. The first name that came, well, there's actually two names that came to mind first. One of them, I do want to just say and get out of the way because I don't want to focus on this individual too much, mostly because I don't know if I would consider him an actor turned director by the most literal definition. And that is perhaps my favorite filmmaker, Charlie Chaplin. And because I mean, he certainly has a visual acting artistic presence, but I mean, in some ways, he was always directing his own short films that then eventually became feature films. So he was kind of always equally a director as he was an actor. And I did think of that name, and in actuality, he would probably be the first one that I want to talk about here. In many ways, he is. But I think there are more examples we can think of those who were seen by the public eye as actors first, who then decided, I am going to try my hand at directing a movie. And in that regard, the first name that came to mind was Clint Eastwood. Of course, Clint Eastwood, like the spaghetti Western man himself, mostly working with Sergio Leone. That was really his claim to fame with the Dollars trilogy there, or the Man with No Name trilogy, whatever you want to call it. But then, testing out his abilities as a director, and his career as a director is one of the most fascinating, I think. Like I feel like it's one of the most literal definitions of peaks and valleys, because
a lot of movies,
not all of them great, but the ones that are great are kind of amazing. I love his debut film, Play Misty, for me. I think that's a really effective film. Of course, he starred in that as well. But it wasn't until, I mean, he had some hits before Unforgiven, but I feel like Unforgiven was the moment where we really took him seriously as a director. I think he did a lot of great films before that, such as The Outlaw Josie Wales,
Pale Rider, some big westerns.
Yeah,
but I think you're kind of right.
Josie
It was like,
Wales.
Clint doing a western, of course, obviously he can do that, and then he kind of flips the western on its head, and then he does some other. Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made that Bridges of Madison County is actually his best movie, and that movie feels so far afield.
I really like that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie, and it's so far away from everything that Eastwood was known for in his movie star career and his early directing career, for the most part. Clint's the man. He's the man. He's making another one. He's like 95. Let's do it.
Apparently, this might be his last one. And
that's probably what he said last time.
I mean, with Cry Macho, I think it was, which I admittedly haven't even seen yet. But, I look at his career, and even before Unforgiven, where we really saw the awards attention that he received, even movies like Bird, which I'm not sure if you've ever seen.
I haven't seen it.
That's if you love jazz music, it's a really good movie, obviously detailing the life of Charlie Parker. But that was, I think if it wasn't for Unforgiven, I feel like we'd be looking at Bird as perhaps the real transition point and looking at him as a real director. But interestingly, even further from that, I feel like Mystic River in 2002 was almost like a rebirth of sorts, almost like a new debut. It felt like a completely different movie when Mystic River came out. And that one was focused on all of these actors outside of just Clint himself. And it was a really interesting change of pace. And since then, he kind of developed this like raw, gritty, old-fashioned aesthetic that was always there, but became even more prevalent in the early 2000s onward.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his last 15 years of movies.
Yeah.
And especially even mostly the last 10 years, they are very chopped down, explorations of great people doing great things most of the time is what he's been doing. And then every now and then he's like, hey, can I make a Jersey Boys movie? And you're like, Warner Brothers is like, look, you can do whatever you want. You've been doing it for this long. We'll let you do whatever you want.
Gosh, I love Clint, but I don't think he was the right director for Jersey Boys.
Yeah, it's a wild career, and going back to, again, all of those films. I mean, you look at he did the Mandela movie. He did the J. Edgar Hoover movie. He did the Sully movie. He did American Sniper. He did the Richard Jewell movie. He did the 1517 to Paris. It's all these stories about very specific, what in his mind were, to one degree or another, heroes, or at the very least, iconic human beings. And I think he's been very good at that for the last decade plus. But you go beyond that, again, some of his 90s, early 2000s stuff is like fantastic and not as stripped down. Some of it is a lot more lavish than what we're used to him, what we're used to from him at this point. And it is one of those things where I think he learned from some of the legends that he worked with growing up or in the industry, and took so many of those lessons. And apparently Bradley Cooper is really a disciple of Eastwood, is what he has said. He said everything that he has kind of learned as a director, he learned from Clint.
I could see that. I can really see that. Do you have a favorite Clint Eastwood film that he directed specifically?
I mean, boring answer is probably Unforgiven. But if it's not so Unforgiven, good, it's Bridges of Madison County. Yeah.
Now that's interesting. If it's not Unforgiven for me, it might be $1 Million Baby, honestly.
It's a great movie. Great movie.
Yeah. I love that one quite a bit. Who's another name as far as actors turned directors that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, so you mentioned Charlie Chaplin's, who to me was always equal parts actor and director.
Agreed.
Kind of aligning with the Affleck of it all. I thought more about people who were actors and then turned to directors.
Yeah.
And so along the same lines as Clint, I thought of Robert Redford. Who is
had him on my list as well.
Not, in my opinion, one of my favorite directors again. I think he's made some very bad films. And I'm not sure he's made, in my opinion, a great film, but it is funny when you go back and look at his kind of generation, and I would say he's in the same generation as an Eastwood, as I'm sure we'll talk about him eventually, a Ron Howard. These people who got in the industry young, understood the process, understood the expectations of making a movie, and got the clout within the industry to be like, okay, I would like to make a movie, please. And so they got to make a movie. And Redford has had a tremendous amount of success, commercially and critically as a filmmaker. I'm not even sure what my favorite movie that he's directed.
I haven't seen them all. I'm admittedly pretty blind to some of his more recent offerings. Like I haven't seen The Company You Keep. I haven't seen Lions for Lambs, actually. I really like Quiz Show. I think Quiz Show is
that's my favorite. Just kind of by default.
Okay. I know a lot of people might say Ordinary People nowadays, and I feel like there's been a bit of a resurgence, a critical resurgence for that film, and it is one I am admittedly due for a rewatch, but
I'm the same way.
My gut instinct right now is to say Quiz Show. I think that's a really interesting movie.
I agree with you. That's a good film. I wouldn't call it a great film, but
I'd be pretty close to great. If I look back at the year 1994 and I try and do a top 10 based on what films I've seen from that year, it might make it. I don't know.
That's a good year. I mean, that's a famous.
That's a really good year. Yeah, it's a famous movie year. You're right.
But I mean, you look at Legend of Bagger Vance and stuff like that. It is a checkered filmography, to say the least. But he's kept making movies. He's made like 8 or 9 movies, I think. And that's over the course of 40 years. So it's not like he's the most prolific filmmaker of all time or anything.
Right.
But he clearly really enjoys being a director, and he just got to the point. If you look over the course of history, these guys who just got big enough where they could ask, "Can I direct a movie?" and the studio was like, I mean, if we say no, you'll probably never make a movie as an actor with our studio again. So, okay, that's fine. For him, he enjoyed it enough, and he was obviously successful enough with Ordinary People that he just got to keep making movies.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool thing. And, between the parallels between Clint Eastwood and Ron Howard are kind of undeniable as just these people who churn out commercially successful, I would say largely unremarkable, but occasionally great movies. Mm-hmm. I think the peaks of Howard and Eastwood far surpass the peaks of a Redford. But
yeah, I'm with you on that, especially with someone like Ron Howard, who, it's interesting because we're talking about actors turned directors with the mindset of people from Hollywood that we saw as actors first and then who tried their hand at directing, where someone like Ron Howard, I think nowadays is mostly seen as a director. And maybe that's because he primarily came from television as an actor. And maybe that had something to do with it, that it just transcends the, or not transcends, but it's such a transition in the art form that it almost feels disconnected. Which is why another name I want to bring up that I think is maybe even more comparable in that way is someone like a Rob Reiner, who.
Oh man, I didn't even think about him because I hardly think of him as an actor. But you're right.
Yeah,
right.
Who was it? Meathead from All in the Family. Really, really funny comedic presence as a supporting role in that show. But you look at his filmography in the '80s, especially. I mean, there's an argument to be made that he was maybe the most bankable filmmaker of the '80s outside of Steven Spielberg. I mean,
he's got one of the all-time runs.
He really does. And now, admittedly, I haven't seen a movie like The Sure Thing, his second film after This Is Spinal Tap. But from what I understand, it was still a fairly modest hit. But then you also have Stand By Me. You have Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Misery. So I just mentioned two films that were based on Stephen King novels, and those two are widely considered to be among the best adaptations of any of his works.
Yeah.
And then even A Few Good Men, which has a great following as well. It's not until he went north that he just completely lost it. But yeah, that run from 84 through 92 is kind of unstoppable.
Yeah, it's so funny thinking about how present he was in American culture then, because he's still making movies, folks.
He is.
Regularly. And no one in America knows it. He has just become, all due respect to the man, he's had a great career, incredible amount of success. Irrelevant is what he has become.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And even after, he had a little bit of a comeback with The American President there after North. And then that's really when he kind of started going into obscurity. Although I feel like The Bucket List made a lot of money. But
that's the thing. Yeah, I'm noticing that some of his later films, when I say some, I mean really The Bucket List more than anything else, was definitely a hit with audiences. And a lot of people seem to like that one. There was definitely a disconnect between audiences and critics on that one. But it was a bit of a hit from what I understand. And I know a lot of people really liked it.
Yeah, I haven't seen it since it came out, but I
thought it was okay. I thought it was fine.
I remember terribly fondly. But speaking of actors turned directors who come from the sitcom world, how about a director that I find to be very interesting because of his darker comedic sensibilities, and that's Danny DeVito.
Interesting.
Really like Danny DeVito as a director.
Oh, he's so quirky. He's so quirky.
He is kind of one of a kind in the way that he approaches his films. You think about like Throw Mama from the Train.
Yeah.
Just a tonally very, very unique movie. Again, this is a guy who I would say hasn't made a full out great movie. Has also made Duplex, which is an absolutely atrocious movie. I haven't seen all of these, but Duplex I think is awful. Matilda is for my generation, people about our age, very revered.
Yeah.
And Death to Smoochie is a fascinating
I
movie. I don't know if I call that one a success or a failure, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm so glad it exists. That's all I'll say about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And those are kind of the movies that he made. And it's been a minute since he's been able to direct a movie, but
yeah,
he's got such a unique sensibility, and I think it stems from his work in the 70s. I think you really see that there, and I think you see it now in him being kind of the big proponent, the propulsive force of the commercial success of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I think speaks to those sensibilities too. So you see that throughout his career as both an actor and a director, and I'd be totally down for another Danny DeVito directed movie.
Oh, I would as well. I would as well. And you make a great point that his work on Always Sunny in Philadelphia is weirdly like in parallel with some of the films that he has directed up until that point. They have a pretty similar comedic style. Even a film like Matilda, as tender and sweet as that film is, and there's a lot behind the scenes that kind of bled into that as well. It's got the same kind of quirky, manic, almost mean-spirited energy.
Oh, that movie can be mean.
It can be,
sure.
and but it's this is what I love about Danny DeVito as a filmmaker, is that when he is doing that, he has a really interesting grasp on tonal balance that most other filmmakers just don't have, who are trying to do the same thing. Because as mean as Matilda is, I think about the scene where, what's the character's name? Miss Trunchbull grabs the young lady's hair by her pigtails and swings her over the fence. I feel like any other director would make that into a horror scene by mistake. And as mean as that scene is, there's still something kind of childlike and funny about it. That's hard to do. That's really difficult for any filmmaker. It really
captures the Roald Dahl essence.
Yeah. You could tell that DeVito was really inspired and really cared about the source material. He had a massive respect for it. Looking at my list here, trying to break away just a little bit, we could go on for literally hours talking about as many actors turned directors as we can. We haven't really talked about many women yet. But when looking at the female category, the first name that came to mind was Sofia Coppola, who I think we mostly see as an actress because of her notorious performance in Godfather Part 3. Or The Godfather Coda, as it's referred to now. But so whether you want to consider her for this list, I guess, is up for debate. And if she is considered, it might not be for the right reasons. But even so, if we do consider her, she is, it's interesting. Her father has directed at least 3 of the greatest movies ever made, right? And many people would at least argue that. Maybe even 4, if you want to count the conversation.
4. He's got the greatest 4-film streak in history.
Does he have the greatest 70s output ever? Or at least up there?
I would probably say Altman, but that's just due to sheer quantity.
Yeah, Altman's got the numbers to back it up as far as how many films he made and how many of them were so ahead of the time, as you and Ryan talked about during that Robert Altman movie series. But, Sofia Coppola's father made some of the greatest movies ever made all in one decade. And yet I think she has a more consistent filmography as a director than her father does, which is kind of interesting to say.
She never made Jack. I'll give her that.
Well, did Francis Ford Coppola ever really make Jack?
Well, it's fair. But no, that's an interesting one because she is so derided as an actress. It's interesting to frame her as an actress turned director. I do like that though.
Yeah.
And just to continue the trend of female filmmakers, how about I'll throw out a kind of double header here of 2 actors turned directors who I view as have taken sort of parallel paths, which is to say they started out as enormous movie stars in the 90s and mostly stopped acting to become fairly pedestrian filmmakers. And these 2 people are George Clooney and Angelina Jolie. I just find it so fascinating that they've got more money than God, both of them, independently. And they just decided that they wanted to they were far more interested in directing than acting. And
Yep.
every now and then they'll pop up. I think Clooney mostly pops up because he's the way that he gets a film financed. He says, I'll star in it if it'll get my movie financed.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting. He, of course, is the recipient of my Robert Zemeckis Please Retire Award after...
That's my favorite
Was that
award
last
that
year?
you've ever created.
I think he is a genuinely bad director. I will say that about George Clooney. I think he is a bad filmmaker.
Are there any films of his that you at least like as a director?
Gosh, I was looking at this earlier. What's the one I like?
Good Night and Good Luck. Is that the one you're thinking of?
Yes, Good Night and Good Luck is the one I like. And
I do like that one.
Confessions of a Dangerous Mind is almost good to me.
I think that film is... I like that film quite a bit. In fact, as I look at his filmography as a director offhand, that one might be my favorite of his, mostly because of Sam Rockwell's performance. But
Yeah.
I can't help but think of the potential that film lost considering Charlie Kaufman's writing and how at times it barely even feels like a Charlie Kaufman script. So I'm kind of wondering if that was a producer problem or a George Clooney problem. I'm not really sure.
Well, that's kind of the thing I hate most about George Clooney directed films is they are so bland to me.
I think
you talk
fair.
about a director who is capable of sanding off the edges of a Charlie Kaufman script. It's kind of George Clooney to me.
Mm-hmm.
He is he has no style. He, to me, does not have any sort of worldview in the films that he makes. I feel no individualism, no ubiquity in the films that he directs.
And it's
I feel the
interesting.
same way about Angelina Jolie, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting with regard to George Clooney, the film of his that, aside from Confessions of a Dangerous Mind and Good Night and Good Luck, the film of his as a director that arguably has the most style is Suburbicon, but it's a style completely ripped from the Coen brothers. And I think that's far and away the worst thing that he has ever done. But, going to Angelina Jolie there for a second.
Who has also directed a Coen brothers script.
Oh,
Unbroken.
Yeah, that's well. I mean, was it really a Coen Brothers script by the time it became a final film? Because I know that they were tied to it, and you could sometimes sense the Coen Brother isms in that movie when there's some jokes being cracked between characters.
It's kind of like
yet,
Bridge of Spies.
kind of. But with regard to Angelina Jolie, I will give her at least some credit as a filmmaker. She at least has one film I genuinely loved, and that was First They Killed My Father. Which I thought was a really effective war thriller and coming of age film as well. But aside from that, I thought Unbroken was fairly pedestrian, and I haven't even seen her most recent film, and a film's title that I can't even think of offhand. I think you and Ryan reviewed it on Extra Film, if I'm not mistaken. But I heard mixed things about that one as well.
God, did we?
I thought you did.
We did. I absolutely do not remember it. So now
That's
I'm
so
curious. I gotta look it up.
unfortunate. But yeah, going to her filmography for just a second. First They Killed My Father, I thought was actually one of the better films of. Actually, no, I take it back. She starred in that movie, but she didn't direct it. The film I was thinking of was Those Who Wish Me Dead.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was directed by Taylor Sheridan. Okay, she starred in it, but she didn't direct it. That's my mistake. But yeah, she had directed In the Land of Blood and Honey, Unbroken, By the Sea, and First They Killed My Father. And First They Killed My Father, I think, is genuinely great.
Yeah, I honestly remember very little about that one. I need to give that one a rewatch, but I just find it interesting that there is an argument to be made that at one point they were the biggest male and female movie star on the planet, and then they kind of took this path. George Clooney got that tequila money and said, "I don't have to act anymore." And Angelina Jolie, was obviously making that Tomb Raider money, and was like, "I don't have to do this anymore." And Angelina Jolie, you see, like you said with the Sheridan movie, she's starting to come back a little bit. And,
yeah.
And that's interesting. Clooney, it feels like, is still just doing Clooney movies to get them made. What was the Netflix movie
Was it the
sci-fi
Midnight
movie.
Sky?
Midnight Sky. Yeah, Midnight Sky. What just
Which which I wanted to love because I thought the concept was at least interesting. I don't think the movie itself really worked for me.
No, it doesn't live up to it. And he made the tender bar.
The tender bar. Him trying his hand at the Affleck isms there. Looking at a few others here, we are talking about Angelina Jolie, so I did at least want to highlight another female filmmaker here, and this is someone that's very top of mind right now because she just won an Oscar for her latest film and the writing of that film. But I'm thinking of Sarah Polley. Obviously, the film that she won an Oscar for was Women Talking. But her filmography as a director is very strong, especially considering the fact that some of her earliest works were as an actress in some pretty wild films. Films like Go. What was that? The Doug Liman film? Was that Doug Liman? I can't quite remember. I want to make sure I get this right. Give me a sec. Oh, yes, Doug Liman. That was the Doug Liman.
Liman.
Yeah. Also working a little bit with Cronenberg just before that, Existence, the film from 1999. And then tries her hand at directing and has had a pretty consistent career as a director. We know that she had a decade-long gap between the documentary Stories We Tell and her latest film, Women Talking, for pretty unfortunate reasons, but understandable reasons. But her films as a director, she's been very consistent. And some of those have made many critics' best of the year list for those respective years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a true talent. And when you said this female director is top of mind, I thought you were going a completely different direction. I thought you were going Greta Gerwig.
Well, she's also top of mind, but I feel like that one's very obvious, and I know we're going to talk about her at some point. We may even talk about her during the Q&A coming up in just a little bit. But yeah, okay, not really top of mind. Let me rephrase that. Somewhat top of mind because she's now an Academy Award winner.
Yeah. But as I was putting together the list of actors turned directors of recent, I did, between Olivia Wilde, Elizabeth Banks, Maggie Gyllenhaal, Greta Gerwig, there's a good crop of actresses getting a shot at getting behind the camera, which is encouraging. So that's definitely a big plus. And then can we talk about failed actors turned directors?
We can. I mean, I still have a few other successes that I think we should at least mention.
Let's do the successes. And then
because I know, you have some failures you want to highlight. I don't really have many failures because you know me, Jay. I'm more of the celebratory one here. I want to look at the positive end of.
Over the course of research, I was like, oh man, I forgot that person made a movie.
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear what you have to say.
Although I could. Look, I saw Cocaine Bear. I might be prepared to call Elizabeth Banks's career a failure, but we don't have to talk about that.
It's so unfortunate because I really like Pitch Perfect too. That's actually my favorite Pitch Perfect film. I thought she did a really good job with the comedic timing of that film and the female camaraderie there. But anyway, that's beside the point. I do at least want to highlight a few other successes here. People like Jordan Peele, for instance, I think is really effective right now, developing his own unique voice as a director that almost feels disconnected from his acting / comedic persona, which is really exciting to see. Jon Favreau is another one.
I have him on here, and my note right next to him is maybe the most important director of the 21st century.
It's so interesting. Who would have thought that? If you told me that was going to be the case like 10 years ago, I would have said no, that's just not happening. But I would have been wrong.
Yeah, I guess because that would have been early on in Marvel, I guess. But
yeah, well, 10 years ago, actually, you know what? Well, maybe 10 years ago, I think I would have still been saying that same thing. But I would have been wrong. Would have been wrong for sure.
15 for sure.
Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't mention Mel Gibson yet. Mel Gibson,
our unproblematic king.
Unproblematic for sure. John Krasinski, I guess, in some ways. I mean, he has 3 films to his name, including 2 of the Quiet Place movies. He directed something before that. He directed a comedy, but kind of
directed the David Foster Wallace movie.
Did he?
Not the Seagull one. It was based on a David Foster.
Oh
Wallace
yes,
book.
yeah. Okay, you're not the end of the tour. Yeah, you're thinking of. I know what you're thinking of. But yeah, John Krasinski, I think, is developing his own, I guess, horror-like voice now after A Quiet Place, which is very disconnected from his talents in front of the camera. I guess the last one I'll mention here is Tom McCarthy, who's a pretty interesting figure behind the camera. He has a Best Picture winner to his name, but he's not much of an actor. He's really known to pop up in a few bit parts here and there, such as in Meet the Parents, for instance. And he's actually kind of effective in his small role there, but I think he's a pretty effective filmmaker when it counts. He's done some pretty decent movies up until I didn't see some of his latest films, but I think up until Spotlight, I think he's made some pretty good ones.
Did you mention Tom Hanks?
You did, so I didn't get a chance to mention him yet. I know you talked about Tom Hanks a little bit in the opening of this conversation.
That Thing You Do is a really good flick.
That movie rocks, and I love that it's a Pennsylvania film. It is so close to home, quite literally.
Yeah, and there are several people that I consider in that Charlie Chaplin realm of equal parts actor and director. Your Orson Welles, your John Cassavetes, your, again, going the unproblematic route, your Woody Allens.
Yeah.
There are certainly plenty of those, but I did,
Great
for the
examples.
purpose of this episode, I was thinking more along the Affleck route of actor turned director, as opposed to actor director throughout their entire career. Pretty
I'm
much.
with you.
So those are kind of the success stories I have. Let's talk about these weird outliers. Some of them are one-offs, some of them are two-offs. Very rarely do they have a very sustained directing career. Eddie Murphy directed a movie, y'all. Harlem Nights.
That's right, he did. Oh my gosh.
And apparently he absolutely hated directing. He found it boring and tedious. And I have not seen Harlem Nights.
I haven't either.
By all accounts, it is an atrocious film. You don't really find people reclaiming Harlem Nights.
It has a whopping 16% on Metacritic based on 14 reviews. Which
on Metacritic, not even Rotten Tomatoes. That's Metacritic.
That's on Metacritic.
I did not know that Nicolas Cage directed a movie.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. I forget what it's called. I forget what the name of it is.
It's called Sonny. It is a James Franco movie. He plays a former gigolo returning home from the military. That's all I know about it. It's supposed to be quite bad. But that was interesting. Robert De Niro directed a couple movies, A Bronx Tale and The Good Shepherd, which are like, those are like whatever. They're not horrible. They're not disastrous. They're not masterpieces. They're just sort of there.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of the case with several actors turned directors, where it's like, I've spent too much time on a set to make a truly terrible movie, but also I don't really have the chops to make something truly great, which is just kind of interesting. Those were some of the weird outliers I had. If I could point out one more positive, and this veers a little bit more into TV, but I think he's made some good films too. And I think he is kind of the heir apparent to the DeVito sensibility as a director, and that's Ben Stiller. I think Ben Stiller is a good director.
I think he's an interesting director. Yeah, you're not wrong there. And I think he's pretty ambitious. I actually don't think he gets enough credit for how ambitious some of his films are. I mean, Tropic Thunder say what you will about how silly that film is. It's pretty bold. There are things about that movie that are very daring, especially today, and I really respect him for that.
Yeah, now I mean he's got heat right now with Severance. So
yeah,
he is kind of the taste of the week right now in the television world. So
I have to say, with regard to Ben Stiller, I don't hate The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I actually think that's a pretty charming movie.
It's very sweet.
Yeah,
kind of.
Yeah,
I think more than that movie should be. But it's well directed, I think. I think it looks
so.
Good.
Yeah.
I like The Cable Guy, I gotta say. And I'm not a big Jim Carrey fan, but I quite like The Cable Guy.
I think that's one of those movies that has aged weirdly well, and I don't really know why. I think we need to do a full episode analyzing why The Cable Guy works more now than it did back then.
Cable Guy episode next week. Get ready, folks.
Get ready for that. We're just announcing it right now. We didn't really have much planned for next week, so we're just going to talk about The Cable Guy. That's what we're going to be doing. But anyway, I think this was a really fun conversation on actors turned directors. It has led to some really interesting endeavors with regard to filmmaking and artistic stars and voices and how that could change and shift depending on who that voice is. Maybe coming from an acting background leads to a very specific voice behind the camera that most directors just can't quite communicate. And that's always exciting to see, even if it ends up being a failure, like the ones we just
George
talked
Clooney,
about.
please stop making movies.
Unless it's George Clooney.
Act
Yes.
again.
I love him on screen.
Ocean's
I
14.
I would pay for that months in advance. I would love to see that. Anyway, for those of you listening, let us know how our picks there stack up against yours. Let us know some of your favorite actors turned directors. You can email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com or hit us up on social media. All right, Jay, before we got recording this episode here, we were talking offline about really our careers, just our workplace environments, the fact that we do work 9 to 5. We have careers that we're very passionate about, that we're dedicated to. I just started a new job today as we're recording this. But what is one thing that you need to have in any office environment?
So you've seen George of the Jungle, correct?
Oh, of course. I know where you're going with this. Yep.
There's a scene in that film where George of the Jungle tries coffee for the first time, and he is so overcome with the sensation that coffee gives him that he just starts shaking and cannot say anything but java 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 java, and that is me. Every morning when I'm getting ready for work, I gotta have that caffeine hit. I gotta have that coffee.
I'm with you. What does he say? Now, George, understand. George get coffee, and then Ursula like George. But then, I don't know, coffee just makes people respond to you positively. It's like if you're a coffee drinker, you belong. You absolutely belong. And for those that do work in the workforce and drink a lot of coffee, and of course, if you're George of the Jungle, if only they had some coffee cult on their hands, because this is the coffee you need to be drinking. Coffee Cult sources only specialty grade Arabica coffee beans from over 50 countries around the world. They inspect each bean and only select the highest grade, resulting in a quality of coffee that is absolutely unmatched. They have a variety of great flavors, and they roast their coffee to order, which means whatever you order from their site, it ships directly to your door. It is freshly made, and it is not stale, nor is it contained with any of those preservatives that you normally find from coffee brands on those drugstore shelves meant to last as long as possible. No, with Coffee Cult, they recognize that coffee is kind of an art form. The making of coffee really is an art, and it tastes wonderful. It is absolutely fresh.
Yeah, absolutely. And additionally, they only source their coffee from farms that pay its workers, especially women, fairly and equally, which we absolutely love. I mean, we
love that.
We go from not just loving the flavor the same way that George of the Jungle does, but loving the world, really, and loving Coffee Cult, like George of the Jungle loves the jungle or loves Ursula. It's a love that goes beyond just this desire for caffeine. It's a love for what Coffee Cult represents.
In many ways, it all comes down to this idea of sustainability, the jungle, and everything. I feel like we're getting a little political with this now, but either way, Coffee Cult is very respectful of the coffee it makes while also making a great product. So if you go to coffeecult.com, you'll see a wide selection of various coffee blends that you can choose from, and you will get 15% off when you use the code ISF. That is capital I, capital S, capital F, to get 15% off your first order at coffeecult.com. That is Coffee Cult with a K.
And just a reminder, George of the Jungle has an Oscar now.
The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our good friends over at First Time Watchers. And Jay, we just got done talking about our favorite actors turned directors, or at least some of the most prominent examples of actors turned directors. And with regard to the First Time Watchers, they act the shit out of their podcast, and they direct a great episode out of the process there too.
They sure do. And you think about every now and then you'll have an actor directing his first film, and And you go into the theater and you're like, is this director really deserve to get this movie made? I'm kind of scared that he's not going to have the vision required to become nearly as successful a director as an actor. But you don't have to worry about that with the guys over at First Time Watchers, because they have been doing this for a while.
Indeed.
You are in good hands with the likes of Tim, Walter, and Hermano, and they know their freaking movies. I will absolutely guarantee you that.
They do know their movies. And what's interesting about how well they know their movies, just look at what they reviewed on their most recent episode 484. They talked about Bad Boys, but not the Bad Boys you're probably aware of. There's a movie called Bad Boys from 1983 starring Sean Penn. I didn't even really know about this, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we of course always associate the term Bad Boys with Michael Bay, at least in the film world. So the fact that they're choosing to be a bit, I guess, meta with their overall approach to movie reviews, that's what really makes their show all the more entertaining and all the more enlightening. And with regard to that conversation, they had a great conversation talking about that 1983 film, Bad Boys, and really dissected why it's a very interesting film for you to check out.
Fun fact, I just watched the Michael Bay Bad Boys for the first time this weekend.
I don't think it's that great. I don't think it holds up.
Not a good movie. So hopefully the 1983 Bad Boys is better. And what I do love so much about First Time Watchers is that every week they pick out a movie that they've never seen before, watch and discuss it on their show, and they also discuss some other movies and trailers that they've seen recently as well.
Yeah, and they'll give out some great recommendations at the end that you should absolutely stay and listen for. Their show is very smart, and I guess, dare I say, it's bad. These boys are bad. But
those boys are bad.
They are bad.
There's some bad boys.
But when it comes to movie reviews, they're anything but bad. So I guess it cancels itself out. So, Jay, where can you find these guys online?
Make sure that you hit them up on Twitter at First Time Watchers and search for First Time Watchers on Facebook. And you can subscribe to them on iTunes / Apple Podcasts and go leave them a review there. And you know what? Let them know that we sent you.
Yeah.
By tweeting at them and saying hashtag FTW Bad Boys for Life. How about that?
I like that one. I like that one. That one does seem a little bit too celebratory. If I have to be a bit jabby with the First Time Watchers, I like to say that they're bad boys because they're choosing to end their show at episode 500. And we constantly talk about this. They do have an endpoint, and I'm so disappointed to hear that. But episode 500 will be their last. Of course, the episode that they just put out is episode 484. So they're not quite there yet. But yeah, they're bad boys for life because they're choosing to end this show way earlier than it should. Go on forever, guys. Be good boys. Just keep going. Just keep going. But if you want to listen to what they keep putting out, all the great content that they've put out over the years as well, you have to check these guys out. Again, it is First Time Watchers. Let's get into some Q&A here, Jay. We threw out some not questions, but we threw out the opportunity for our Twitter followers and some of our other listeners to submit some questions our way that they would like to hear us address. And we did get some pretty interesting questions here that I want to get your thoughts on, and hopefully our listeners want to get both of our thoughts on. And we mentioned the name Greta Gerwig during our actors turned directors conversation. Obviously, Greta Gerwig has a new movie coming out called Barbie. It is all over the Twitter sphere. If you live on film Twitter, you can't get away from those Barbie posters without someone editing themselves onto the poster. I feel like that is the new thing to do. But the question we got was, what are our thoughts on Barbie? And I think that question is really more geared towards the recent marketing campaign, especially the latest trailer that we saw I think about a week ago as we're recording this, maybe just under a week ago. But Jay, what are your thoughts on the film and the marketing that you've seen thus far? And has that generated any excitement for you at this point?
I will say my first thought is that it is absolutely hilarious to see written by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach on the card at one point in the Barbie trailer.
Yeah.
And broadly, I would say I'm not worried about Barbie after that trailer. I think it looks very stylish. I am trying to figure out tonally exactly what the movie is going for, because I don't understand. It has some of the cringiest seconds of a trailer I've seen in a very, very long time. At the very
wonder
end of the most recent trailer.
the beach moment, the beach gag, I guess we'll say.
The beach off sequence in the trailer, I think, is absolutely abysmal. And there are a handful of images that imply a level of cleverness. Certainly when you see Barbie step out of her high heels and her feet maintain the kind of shape of the Barbie feet that you see on the dolls and the shape of the high heel.
Yeah, I thought that was really
very
cool.
clever. I have no idea what the story of this movie is going to be. Gosling, I love Ryan Gosling.
Same.
It's another one of those things where I'm trying to figure out what is the angle here. What's the take? And I can't totally decipher what it is yet. I liked the teaser, the 2001 inspired teaser. It told you nothing about the movie. It got you excited because you were like, Greta Gerwig knows movies. This is good. It's going to be a movie for people who like movies. Greta Gerwig is doing it. And I love Greta Gerwig's movies so far. Little Women, fantastic. Makes me cry.
Probably
so
the best
hard
movie
every
of
time.
that year. Probably the best movie of that year, honestly,
is,
as I think about it.
What year was that? Was that
2019.
19. Wow.
That was the same year as Uncut Gems.
All right. I like Uncut Gems more than that, but that might be the only one.
I think those are my top two. I think, at that time I had said my favorite movie of the year was The Last Black Man in San Francisco, but I think as time has gone on, I've been more receptive towards Little Women and Uncut Gems. But those three are my top three.
Is that first Reformed year?
I think it was. No, was that? That may have been a few years before that. That's how you know we've been doing this for a long time, when we start forgetting these years.
Kidding. Oh, I got it right here. Oh, God. Look at this. You know what? Yeah, I got it at number 3. It's not First Reformed year. It's Portrait of a Lady on Fire year.
It is. It's Celine Sciamma's year.
Portrait, Uncut Gems, Little Women, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
What a trifecta.
That's a good year right there.
That's a really good year.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm still looking forward to the movie for sure. I trust Greta Gerwig to make this film. From the very first time I heard about the movie, I was like, why is that what she's doing? I have faith in her that she is motivated to make this film from an artistic perspective far beyond the paycheck, right? I mean, I have complete faith that she is taking this on with a level of sincerity and artistic interest. But from what I've seen so far, other than the fact that I think it looks really good, I love the style, the kind of toy world that Greta Gerwig and company have invented with this movie. I'm hesitant, a little bit hesitant with what I've seen. But again, still looking forward to it.
I feel like we need to listen to our good friend Ryan McQuaid on this one, who is refusing to watch any trailer for this movie. All he needs to know is that Greta Gerwig is writing a Barbie script with Noah Baumbach and she is directing it. And that on its own terms is exciting. And I will say, from what I've seen from the marketing, because I have watched all of the trailers and marketing images, I've looked at all of these things. The movie, from a visual and artistic standpoint, it doesn't really look like anything I've ever seen, which I kind of have to give it some credit for. And that's something I'm really excited about. And I, like you, I don't really know what the angle is. I don't know what this story or plot is going to be, but that's something I kind of like. It's like they're really purposefully keeping that close to the chest. And I do like that about it. That first teaser, the 2001 inspired teaser that you talked about, might be among my favorite teaser trailers of all time. I think it really...
Brendan is famous for hating trailers.
I don't like trailers.
You strike me as more of a teaser trailer guy, where it's like, here's
am.
the vibe. We're going to tell you almost nothing about the movie.
Yeah, well, I sometimes think of trailers as like an individual or separate artistic statement regarding the film. You can get
They're
creative.
short films.
They are short films, but lately so many official trailers mirror the exact same roadmap, and I'm just kind of sick of seeing the exact same blueprint just reshuffled for whatever movie that they're marketing. It's kind of left the artistic short film mentality go by the wayside, and that's what bugs me. I will say this new Barbie trailer, the official trailer, does disregard that at least a little bit, but I was kind of mixed on the new trailer, just with regard to how it functions as a trailer. There are moments that made me laugh genuinely. The whole gag at the beginning with Barbie and Ken talking about sleeping over at each other's houses, and they'd say, "What would we do?" I really do not know. I thought that was really funny. But then there's that beach gag at the end, which is what word did you use? Abysmal? I think that's the word you use. Something like
bleak, troubling.
I think you're still being too kind. I think you're being too kind to it still. That is one. I because I hate movie trailers so much, I find myself being more hyperbolic than I should. So that's why I sound like I'm speaking in hyperbole and exaggeration when I say that teaser is probably one of my favorites of all time as far as teaser trailers go. But that beach moment is one of the worst things I've ever seen in a movie trailer. And I think it's, I don't know if it's the joke itself or just the timing of it within the trailer that we saw. Maybe it'll work in the moment with the film and how it actually functions inside the film. I don't know. So I guess I can't really judge the joke itself, but from how it feels in the trailer and the marketing that we saw, it did not work for me at all. It felt so tonally disconnected from everything else. It didn't feel like Greta Gerwig taking herself seriously. And that's not to say she should, but it didn't even feel like her artistic voice falling into that. That felt like a producer saying, you need to target children, at least for one joke here.
I wish I was a fly in the wall in the room where Noah Baumbach was writing the beach off scene.
I'm curious to hear how that conversation went down, if there was anything genuine about it.
But I guess are they doing like a 21 Jump Street thing? Are they doing Lord and Miller kind of taking down the subject matter?
I think I'm guessing they're doing a little bit of that, but the vibe I get from the end of the trailer is that there's going to be a moment where they find themselves in the real world, and it kind of makes me see it makes it seem like it's going to go. I'm using this comparison only for plot reasons and not tone reasons, but it almost seems like they're going the Smurfs route in some ways, which I don't know. I feel like with regard to Barbie as a property, it makes more sense to do that with Barbie than it does Smurfs. I'll say that. So if they are going to tackle that narrative, maybe they'll have a more interesting angle to it. Maybe it'll barely be in the movie. I don't know.
Isn't there a movie where Tyra Banks plays a doll that comes to life and goes into the real world?
I can't believe I know this, but the movie's called Life Size, and
yes,
it co-stars Lindsay Lohan. I cannot believe I know that.
So this is going to be Greta Gerwig is stealing from Life Sized.
She's stealing from Life Size. I think that was a Disney Channel original movie. It was a DCOM. It was a DCOM back in our childhood days. Anyway,
Greta Gerwig, one of us.
No, gotta love it. Gotta love it. Those are our thoughts on Barbie. I'm still excited for the movie. I didn't love that latest trailer like you, but I'm still excited for the movie. I think it sounds very interesting. To change gears a little bit, we got another question with regard to Harry Potter. And I know you're a big Harry Potter fan, Jay. At least with regard to the movies. You like a lot of those movies for sure.
And yeah, I've read the books.
Yep, same.
Yeah.
And in fact, haven't you been a bigger defender of the Fantastic Beasts movies than most?
I have still not seen the last one.
Okay, interesting. I think it's my favorite. It's my favorite of the three Fantastic Beasts movies. I'll at least say that.
I need to see it. The first one I was like, that was good enough. The second one I was like, that's probably about as good as the first one, which everyone else absolutely hated. And I was like, I don't know. I didn't have a terrible time. Okay. So in that regard, I guess I am a defender. Because
I was going to say, in that regard, you are definitely a defender. But we did have some recent news that apparently Warner Brothers and HBO Max are working on a Harry Potter series, but not just a series, apparently a rebooted series where each season will be an adaptation of that book. So season 1 would be Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you are. Season 2 will be Chamber of Secrets, and so on. So the question we got is, will the Harry Potter reboot be a disaster? That's a really great way to formulate that question. And I don't know if it'll be a disaster. I'm curious to see what you think about this, but I'll just jump the gun and say I'm not excited for it. I'll say that.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm necessarily excited for it either. I would watch it when it came out, but I would not be in a place where if it loses me after 4 episodes, I would stop watching. Mm-hmm. You know? Mm-hmm. There are opportunities when you have this series of books that are, for the most part, very lengthy and very lore heavy and have a tremendous amount of world building. There is an opportunity to take advantage of a longer form of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so there is a way that they can capitalize on this medium shift to television and do something really special. It does feel like, and I know these are not, the Harry Potter films are not the Godfather, but it does feel like we have been told kind of the definitive audio visual versions of these stories.
Yeah.
And I understand that Warner Brothers has this Hogwarts copyright that they want to take advantage of. I get it.
Yep.
They had the video game that came out and it got a lot of people's attention. It got pretty good reviews. I feel like it's kind of fizzled since then a little bit. I played it. It's okay. It did not entirely hold my attention. But there is a way to make this work and make it very, very artistically successful. Mm-hmm. I'm curious. I'm not eager. But HBO, more often than not, makes very good television programs.
That's true. That's true.
So in that regard, it's like, give them the keys, let them drive this car. They might be able to figure it out. They would have to figure out, I don't know. I mean, I guess they're saying it would just be the books, right? One season equals one book.
That's what I've heard. And, as we're recording this, maybe our listeners can cue us in on the official details, but all I've heard is that is what Warner Brothers and HBO Max are planning to do, is what we just said there. I guess what I'm not sure about is how 100% official that is. Is this still a rumor? I think it's more than just a rumor. I think it is pretty official that this is the plan that is being discussed. And you make a great point that those movies, the 8 movies that we got between the years 2001 and 2011, a literal decade-long series there. All of those films very successful, at least at the box office, and most of them very successful critically as well. Kind of the definitive audio-visual version of those stories. And it does make... hearing this news, I have 2 major questions about why we should be seeing this. The first one being, is this really the right time to do this specific artistic venture? And you look at many franchises that have been revisited over the years. That first Harry Potter film came out in 2001. That is an over 20-year-old film. All right, that's actually a pretty long time. Let's think about when Return of the Jedi came out and then Episode 1 came out. That was less time. That was less time between those 2 films.
You just broke my brain with that one.
I know.
That messed me up. In
I'm
a
sorry.
world where we get a new Spider-Man every 3 years, I think 20 years is okay.
Yeah. But here's the thing. I've heard that argument being thrown around that, if Star Wars can be revisited in less than 20 years, why can't Harry Potter? The thing is, that was a prequel to an existing story. It wasn't remaking. It wasn't remaking those stories. And when you reboot something as beloved and as associating as these Harry Potter movies to those stories, it makes me think if it's too soon for that. And I kind of think it is. I think the 20-year separation between that first movie and where we are now is almost moot. I don't think that really matters. I think we're always going to see these movies as crucial to those stories. And I don't think we're ever going to separate that. It just makes me think if it's the right time. And the other question I have, as someone like myself who has read the books, is there really anything else from those books that we need to see in a visual format? I think as far as adaptations go, the movies did a pretty darn good job trimming the fat where they needed to be trimmed and focusing on what was important. And it makes me think if there really is anything necessary that we even need to see from those original J.K. Rowling novels that we'll get in this series. And I don't know if there is. I don't think there is, honestly.
You can get into the real nerdy stuff is the direction you could go.
Yeah, I get
you could go Game of Thrones with it.
You can get into the whole Neville Longbottom history of how he could have been the chosen one.
Yeah, you can have your Neville episode. You can have your Peeves
I could
episode,
just see a whole back episode involving Neville's parents as like episode 3 of The Last of Us between those two characters. I could see it doing more or less the same thing. Wow.
Oh yeah.
Okay, maybe I am excited for the show now.
Episodes. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
But if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a Warner Brothers exec, I think this sense of urgency comes from this idea that Harry Potter might not be as sustaining as we once thought, between the Fantastic Beasts movies not really connecting.
I was going to say, do you think Fantastic Beasts is mostly to blame for that?
I think the author of the series has done very
well.
little
I mean,
to
yeah,
help
I'm not getting into that.
Legacy
I mean, that's kind of
books.
obvious. Yeah.
But between that and the Fantastic Beasts movies, I mean, because that's the only offshoot we've really gotten cinematically of this universe, which does feel ripe for spin-offs and world building and just all sorts of multimedia domination, but they have not been able to really figure that out yet. And so they're going back to the well. They're going to the original stories here because nothing else has really entirely worked. I mean, look, the video game sold like gangbusters. Everybody is happy with the way the video game sold. And I'm sure the Warner people saw that and were like, okay, now's the time to pounce. We got to do it. There's an appetite for this. Let's go. And so I understand the urge to go in this direction. Again, I would give it a shot. I'm not eager. It does give me a little bit of the taste that the Lord of the Rings Amazon series that no longer exists already did when that was announced and released. There's definitely a whiff of desperation to
Agreed.
this idea, but it's not one completely devoid of possibility.
It makes me wonder why Warner Brothers didn't instead jump on the opportunity to try and adapt that British play, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, instead.
I can tell you why, because it's garbage.
Well, okay. Well, I agree. The story is not very good at all. But from what I understand, the play itself, from a production standpoint, is really good.
Sure.
But then again, maybe it's the fan reception of the story itself that prevented them from pushing further on that, or maybe there's a rights issue with it or something. I'm not really sure what the reasoning would be, but it does make me think that there was at least an opportunity to try for some like a fictional reunion, not like the reunion we got that is available on HBO Max right now, but a fictional reunion between these characters in a news story that could have been loosely linked to the cursed child. I don't know. But either way, the news that we got, I'm still not excited for it. But to your point, will I watch it? Probably. So I guess I have no right to complain then. But yeah, Harry Potter news all over the webs right now. Could be interesting. One more question that we got here for our Q&A, and this one is right up our alley, especially your alley, Jay. We got some news of a little movie that you've heard of called Heat 2, or at least not a movie. Started as a novel. Now it's going to be turned into a movie with Michael Mann to direct it. I mean, the question is that we got, are we excited for it? Yes, with a couple asterisks, I think is my answer. I'm not sure how you feel about it.
My first thought is this movie is never going to get made.
Well, what if Ferrari is a huge hit? Not Ferrari. Ferrari. What if that is a huge hit?
I, unfortunately, am pretty confident that Ferrari will not be a huge hit.
That's why I said what if.
Especially with its budget. If Ferrari is a huge hit, sure this might happen, but I am not sure given Black Hat's lack of success.
Yeah.
The only way that this movie will make a lot of money is if it really rides the wave of Ford v Ferrari.
Yeah.
But I have to imagine a Michael Mann Ferrari movie will not have quite the broad appeal. In the year 2023, he doesn't make movies like he used to in the 90s.
Yeah, true.
He makes movies like Miami Vice and Black Hat and these movies that a lot of people find rather off-putting and are very challenging. But let's say hypothetically it does go forward. I guess that's the exercise here.
Yep.
I am actually currently in the process of reading Heat 2. I'm about halfway through.
Okay.
It's a good book. It's quite good, I think, actually.
Interesting. Okay, good to hear.
It really does add some nuance to the events that you see in Heat, and there's plenty of really taut, character-driven drama to be drawn out of that story and put on screen.
Okay.
And then you say Adam Driver is going to star in it. Sounds great. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I don't know. I'd be pumped for it because it's a Michael Mann anything. We don't get very much of that anymore. And I don't think it's possible that it could change the way I think about the original Heat. Because it'll still always be there. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, don't tarnish the legacy of Heat. You know, leave it alone. Leave well enough alone.
Yeah.
So
I hear you.
I'm torn, but then you're like Adam Driver, Austin Butler led movie. Hello, excuse me. That sounds great. Directed by Michael Mann. Sign me up. These are the movies that I want to get made so desperately. So I don't know. I'm pumped about Ferrari. I would be shaking when I went into the theater for Heat 2, both out of excitement and nerves.
Yeah.
So give it to me. Austin Butler as Chris from Heat is like perfect casting. I mean, it was the dream. It was the fan casting the second they announced that they might even be doing this movie, and for it to have actually happened is fascinating. But again, I don't think it'll ever get made. Prove me wrong.
Yeah. I even if you are wrong, I don't necessarily know how I would feel. But I weirdly think I would be more excited to see just a general announcement of a Michael Mann movie, just a general Michael Mann crime thriller starring Austin Butler and Adam Driver. Like, just that idea alone, I think, is more exciting than the fact that it might be a quote unquote Heat 2, a sequel to Heat based on this novel. And it's for those reasons you talked about. I would have a lot of trepidation, a lot of anxiety going into the movie. And in many cases, we can separate that original film from any sequel that comes after it But in some cases, you also can't, right? There are some films that fall within a certain franchise that are kind of dependent on what films come afterwards, and in those cases, you kind of can't separate the original film from what comes after. And if Heat 2 falls into a category like that, and it does something that the original fans or the fans of that original Heat are going to not like, then I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. And that's where the trepidation comes into play.
Well, the Heat 2 is a sequel and a prequel. So
I know
when you throw
Godfather Part 2 is
it can shape the behaviors of the characters in the original Heat the way that you think about them in that film. So there's that element to consider too. But
yeah,
give me all the Michael Mann you got. He hadn't made anything since 2015, except for the Tokyo Vice pilot, which is great.
Yeah.
It was really good. And then the rest of the show isn't as good. But
don't you love it when so many
give me all you got.
Don't you love it when filmmakers spearhead some type of television show, but they only direct the pilot, and then the rest of the series falls apart because of them not directing the rest of it?
The rumor was that like this is a Michael Mann thing. He's so pumped for it, and then it didn't end up being the case that he directed even more than one episode. It was rather disappointing, but still a pretty good show.
Yeah. I still haven't watched it yet, but maybe I'll have to add it to the list.
At least watch the pilot. Just watch the pilot.
All right, I'll watch the pilot. I'll add that to my list at least. As we round out this Q&A here, I did at least want to acknowledge one last question that we got, but I think for the sake of time, we're not going to spend too much time on it here. We actually did get a question asking for our thoughts on the future of Star Wars. And of course, Star Wars is very top of mind right now. We're recording this just days after some major announcements occurred over the weekend at Star Wars Celebration, which included trailers for Ahsoka, included announcements for some upcoming films, some of which directed by Dave Filoni himself. Apparently a Jedi New Order movie starring Daisy Ridley. Yes, she is coming back. I want to leave it at that because we actually have some very exciting bonus content over at Patreon right now that you can check out. It includes our own JD Duran, specifically, speaking with Christian Eulenberg of Film Optics, going over that night over at Star Wars Celebration and getting really into the weeds on what they loved about those announcements. So if you want to hear some of overall InSession Film's thoughts on the future of Star Wars, be sure to sign up. Be sure to sign up on Patreon to become a Patreon over there. Patreon.com/InSessionFilm for some exclusive content there. That'll round up this conversation on Q&A. Jay, we had some great thoughts there. But as we conclude this episode, let's talk about this week's poll. All right. So for this week's poll, we've got an exciting one, Jay. A very exciting one. Last weekend on episode 528, myself, Jay, and Ryan McQuaid did our movie stars draft. We each picked what we thought were the 5 best movie stars, and we asked all of our listeners and followers on social media to vote on who had the best list. And we have the results here, Jay. We have the results. We had about, I think, up to 150 people voting on Twitter. So it was a pretty competitive poll. I think before we get into the results, for those who didn't get a chance to listen to that movie stars draft, maybe we should go ahead and reveal what those lists were that we each had for some context as far as who won. Why don't you go ahead and read off your list if you have it in front of you of those that you picked for your movie stars draft?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I had Jack Nicholson, Harrison Ford, Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, and Gene Hackman. And just saying that list just puts me in a great mood. What a crew.
Just rolls off the tongue there. Great list there. My list included Katharine Hepburn, Robert De Niro, Tom Cruise, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Toshiro Mifune. And of course, Ryan not here to great list. Ryan not here to speak for himself, but his list included Paul Newman, Al Pacino, Meryl Streep, Robert Redford, and George Clooney. If you haven't listened to that episode, the results really don't matter. You just have to hear the conversation that we had on.
Yes, they do. They matter a lot.
They don't matter. I'm going to get into why they don't matter because I didn't win. But what really does matter is the conversation, just sort of talking about what it means to be a movie star, what the criteria is, and all the factors that come into play for better and for worse, as there's a lot that goes into what we decipher as a quote unquote movie star. And it was a very fascinating conversation, sort of deciphering what that criteria was as the conversation went. And apparently one of the biggest criteria is that you have to star in a Nancy Meyers movie. That's what qualifies you as a movie star. But anyway, everyone wants to know what the results are. And it was actually a very tight and competitive race. Out of the nearly 150 votes that we got, but winning the poll at 35% was Mr. Jay Ledbetter over here.
Let's go.
You won by only 1%, though, because I actually came in second place at 34%. Actually, for a while, you had a bit of a lead on both myself and Ryan. It just started to close the gap a little bit as the final votes came in, but not nearly enough to take the lead away from you. So you still won this whole poll at 35%. I came in second at 34%. Ryan McQuaid, third place there at 31%. But given the disparity of those percentages, I'd say we all did pretty well. I think we all did pretty well.
Absolutely. I mean, I was just looking at the list that we put together the day after, and I just thought, man, we did good. Those are some squads there. So
movie star squads. Good for us, yeah. I like to think we know our movies. But anyway, thanks to everyone that voted on that poll on Twitter. We really do appreciate it. That should do it for this week's show. For some ending plugs here, just to throw some plugs your way for things you may have missed over at InSession Film. We did have a full review of Ben Affleck's Air that I talked about in the beginning of this episode that myself and Ryan McQuaid did. You can find that review over at InSessionFilm.com, as well as all of our social media platforms. Also find it on YouTube in video format for a great conversation on Ben Affleck's latest film. Jay, you did get a chance to see it. I don't think I asked your thoughts on the film during this conversation, but you liked it as well, right?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it has a big, this was clearly made with input from Nike problem, but it is an incredibly fun, well constructed, well acted, just kind of old school drama, with some humor thrown in there. I had a really, really good time with it, even if it does leave a little bit of a weird taste in your mouth at certain points, but it's a really good time at the movies.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I definitely enjoyed it as well. I know Ryan was really high on the film. I think he calls it his favorite film directed by Ben Affleck at this point. I'm not quite there just yet. I'm still a Gone Baby Gone defender. I think that one's still my favorite.
I think I might be a townie.
You like the town? Okay. Yeah. I still really like Argo. I feel like that film maybe gets a bit of a bad rap because it's a Best Picture winner. I think it's a very effective thriller. I think it has some really interesting things on its mind for sure. But Ben Affleck, good director. Air, good movie. As far as what we have planned for next week on episode 530, I know we have a couple new movies coming out that will get some reviews at some point. One of them being Renfield, the film that clearly was only made just to see Nicolas Cage play Dracula. We'll potentially have a full review of that. But as far as episode 530, I think because of the movie Renfield, we might have to do something Nicolas Cage related. I think it's only fair. So be on the lookout for what that episode subject will be. But at this point now, my guess and hunch will be Nicolas Cage. The Cageisms. We'll be talking about a very cagey episode there. As far as a few other plugs here, I do want to plug Women in Session and their latest episode. Kristen Battistella and Zeta Short discuss their favorite adventure and swashbuckler movies. I think that's also very top of mind given the recent success of Dungeons and Dragons, which very much functions like a swashbuckler, but they had a great conversation there talking about their favorite films in that movement and that genre. We're also in the middle of a movie series still, talking about the great Wong Kar-wai. At the very least, Jay and Ryan McQuaid are. What's on the docket next, Jay, with regard to that movie series?
So, yeah, we reviewed Fallen Angels last week. I recommend everybody go check that review out because I think that movie is a masterpiece.
I think this guy's directed a lot of masterpieces.
And this week we will be reviewing Happy Together. So look forward to that. We are on the back half of our Wong Kar-wai movie series.
Yeah.
So, get while the getting's good.
You're eventually going to get to one of my all-time favorite movies in this series, and I look forward to your conversation on it. Exactly, my Blueberry Nights. Of course, I'm talking about In the Mood for Love, but yeah, we'll go with My Blueberry Nights. So we'll say that that's the answer. But yes, be on the lookout for that movie series continuing. Really great stuff there. And thanks to everyone for listening. And if you would like what you hear and you want to hear and see some more from us, you can follow us on social media at InSession Film. You can also subscribe to us here on YouTube. Also, follow us and give us a review on your favorite podcast app of choice. We take those reviews very seriously, and we really do appreciate the feedback there. And as I mentioned, you can also hit us up on Patreon. We have some really fun and exclusive content there available to our patrons. Right now, a new episode on Star Wars Celebration, breakdowning everything that came from those announcements with regard to not just Star Wars, but also Lucasfilm. We didn't even mention that there was a new trailer for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And honestly, Jay, the trailer I thought was whatever. The poster is what sold me. I mean, that thing is beautiful. But yeah, I cannot wait to see that.
Somebody forgot to take the needle off Sympathy for the Devil on the trailer.
I agree. I agree. No pushback from me on that one. But yes, that bonus content on Star Wars Celebration featuring our own JD Duran as well as Christian Eulenberg of Film Optics. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Jay, do you have any final thoughts on anything as we conclude this conversation here?
Oh, boy. I see a Kelly Reichardt movie in 2 days. That'll be fun.
Oh, my gosh. You're showing up for that one, aren't you?
I'm showing up, showing out, strapping in, having a good time.
I think we'll have
good filmmaker.
I think we'll have a full review of Showing Up, not this coming week, obviously, but probably next week. I think leading into that film's wide release, which I believe is April 21st, as I recall.
Yep.
So we'll have a full review of that one coming soon, but it is one I am certainly looking forward to. I agree, Kelly Reichardt, one of those filmmakers that we all should be keeping an eye on, and I hope she gets funded for as many movies as possible. I think she's absolutely wonderful. Really great stuff there. Anyway, thanks everyone for listening to this episode. We will see you all next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Woo! What a day, man.